everyone. We'll give everybody a minute or two to sign on, and then I'll get started.
Hi.
Alrighty, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. There are still people logging on. I'm going to stay seated today because I have a decent number of videos I'm going to be showing, and it's just easier than me getting up and down. I think I've worked it out so that I won't have to keep changing the share this time. We'll see if it works. You know, always learning new technology. Everything is fine. So again, your next Explain It to the Media quiz will be a week from today. We'll also do review that day for your exam. Your exam is the day we get back from Thanksgiving break. And then that next Wednesday is review for the final. And then our final is scheduled on your syllabus. So we're assigned that day and time by the registrar's office. So not too much more material to cover now. So we will keep going through development. Again, it's a fairly lengthy chapter, and I'm going to be incorporating a lot of videos starting today to show you what these things look like in kiddos. And then we will go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and share this screen and go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. Alrighty, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Just give me like a thumbs up or a...
It shows your screen, your computer screen.
Okay, so it's not showing the PowerPoint.
No.
Okay, how about now?
No.
Okay, let me see. I might be screen sharing the wrong screen. I have two monitors, so.
We see your cat and your baby.
Well, I mean, that's a good thing to see, but not that helpful for class. Just one sec here. Share. Yes, there we go. How about now? Is that better?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, and can you still see if I put it in this mode?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for your help. I appreciate it, Kristen. Alrighty, so we're going to be talking about attachment as one of our ways to start delving into kiddos. We talked last time about infants, right? And sort of all the prenatal stuff as well. And so Now we're going to start talking about sort of the 1 to 12 year-ish range, okay? And we'll start by focusing on stuff that happens fairly early on. And so attachment is the idea of the nature of your relationship with your primary caregiver. And so the majority of time research has been done on the mother, just because traditionally that's who has been the primary caregiver, although that's certainly changing. And also partially because this idea is more nuanced, but does come out of some of Freud's ideas. And as we know, Freud is very into things about your mother, right? So people come up with creative ways to research this because, again, when kids are this young, 2 or 3, we are not going to see, them able to be like, why, yes, I have this attachment style, right? So they do small behavioral things. And sometimes they do research with animals. So Harry Harlow studied attachment with monkeys. And so he had 2 mothers, quote unquote, for the monkeys. So they were both like mock-ups of a mother monkey. And one of them was all wire, as you can see here. And the other one had a cloth covering. So it sort of replicated what it'd be like to cuddle with an actual mother monkey. And so they put the infant monkey's bottle in the wire mother. And the cloth mother was not providing sustenance. So even though it got its food from the wire mother, the infant monkey would go back to the cloth mother to get comfort, to cuddle, essentially. So I have a quick video of this, and I will show you. And I just remembered I didn't share sound, so let me redo this. Okay. Try that again.
Let me show you a monkey raised on a nursing wire mother. Now here are 106's 2 mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch.
He's going to the wire mother.
He's got to eat to live.
Oh, he's going back.
He's back on the cloth mother, and he'll stay on the cloth mother. Actually, this baby spends from 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother. We had predicted that the variable of contact comfort would be a variable of measurable importance, but we were unprepared to find that it completely overwhelmed and overshadowed all other variables, including those of nursing.
Frankly, Doctor, if it comes to a choice between wire and cloth, it's reasonable to expect that any child will go to the cloth. It's a matter of creature comfort, like a baby with its blanket. But is this really love?
Well, what do you mean by saying that a baby loves its mother? Certainly one thing we mean is that it gets a great feeling of security in the presence of the mother. Now, Mr. Collingwood, wouldn't you say that if you frightened a baby, that it went running to its mother, was comforted, and then all the fear disappeared and was replaced by a complete sense of security, that that baby loved its mother? Now, in this experiment, this is the apparatus we use.
That looks diabolical.
That's just the way the baby monkey feels about it. Flashing eyes, loud sounds, moving mechanical parts, all of these things are designed to frighten a monkey. Now here we have a peaceful, resting baby monkey. Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him.
He's scared, all right.
And he does what any child will do in a similar situation.
He runs away.
It's more than running away. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear. Contact with the mother changes his entire personality. Look, now he's actually threatening the diabolical object. All right. This gives us part of the picture of the strength of infantile love.
So we'll finish it there because you get the gist of the idea. So again, no monkeys were actually harmed, right? They might have been uncomfortable, but as you could see, that machine would not actually hurt them. And once the baby had snuggled with the cloth mother, it kind of stood up to the machine, right? Which was, sort of endearing in its own way. Again, these seem cruel. It is certainly not something I would enjoy doing to little infant monkeys, right? But certainly a way to get at some of these ideas. Mary Ainsworth, however, tried to come up with a way of studying it in human children. And she said, well, let's look at it, in a way that, again, will be sort of minimally evasive, get at this idea of how securely they are attached to the caregiver. So she puts the young child and the caregiver in a room, and then after they get used to it, the caregiver will leave the room, and then they're going to look at how the infant acts when the caregiver leaves the room and then when the caregiver comes back. So again, I have a video for this. Go on over here.
But can the essential elements of home life be translated into a standard laboratory setting for controlled scientific study? After conducting extensive observations of parents and children at home, a student of Bowlby's, Mary Ainsworth, devised such a procedure called the strange situation, which places the child under some stress. It has become the most widely used, standardized way to assess the quality of a child's attachment to their caregiver. Here the researchers are recording how 14-month-old Lisa responds in this attractive but unfamiliar setting. How will she react to a stranger? What will happen when her mother leaves the room? And when she returns? It's Lisa's behavior when her mother returns, what psychologists call the reunion, that they are particularly interested in.
Most importantly is to look for the type of balance that a child strikes between an attachment need and, on the other hand, to explore the play material.
Once Lisa has settled down to play, a stranger enters the room and sits in the chair reading a magazine.
Lisa, where's the bow? Where's the bow?
After a couple of minutes, the stranger attempts to interact with Lisa. Soon after, Lisbeth gets a cue to leave the room. The stranger tries to comfort Lisa, but in vain. Lisbeth comes back into the room, and the camera records how Lisa reacts. Now the first part of the procedure is over, and Lisbeth settles Lisa down again. The stranger leaves them alone together. And soon after, Lisbeth goes too. Lisa is on her own. Her distress is plain to see. Once again, the efforts of the stranger to console Lisa are to no avail. But Lisbeth manages to calm her almost at once, and shortly afterwards the observation ends. Lisa showed outward signs of what's called secure attachment.
Okay, so what they're doing there is they're trying to control for the fact of like, is the baby comforted by anybody, or does it matter if it's the caregivers? That's why the stranger's involved. Yeah, and it is sort of hard to watch a baby cry, right? But having now been a mom, in some ways it's harder because it really pulls at you, but in other ways it's easier because like kids cry a lot of times per day, and we can, she calms pretty quickly when mom comes back, right? So that's a really good sign in terms of secure attachment. So they were trying to make sure it's not just like being alone and then having someone come back that makes her calm down. It's specifically caregiver, in this case specifically mom. So that's a really important piece of this. And as you can see, she was always supervised, whether by the stranger, by mom, or just the fact that the psychologists are watching. I think they were both recording and looking through one of those one-way mirrors. So, if anything had happened, they could get in there real quick. And as you can see, like all the toys are, kiddo friendly and whatnot. So they weren't putting her in any actual risk. So Ainsworth came up with this. And here's her name here, if you need to know how to spell it. And she found that they tend to develop attachment styles by 8 months of age. And now she originally came up with 3, but since her research, it's been expanded to 4. So that's what you see on your screen here. So what you saw Lisa exhibit is called secure attachment. And so secure attachment is where the infant welcomes comfort with the mother or the caregiver, is worried when mom left the room, but was comforted immediately when mom came back. So that's considered a secure attachment, right? So they do get upset when mom leaves, but they can get calmed down pretty quick once mom's back. Mothers of securely attached infants are perceptive of their baby's needs. They respond quickly and consistently to the baby's needs, and they enjoy physical contact with their baby. So that's one of the ways you build this. And the vast majority of infants are securely attached. Then there's insecure attachment. And so there are now 3 subtypes that have been defined. So Michaela sent me a direct message talking about when she used to work at a daycare at the YMCA, and how they would help the kiddos when parents were working out. Yeah, it can be tough, as I told you all, I went to Quinn's first conference, parent-teacher conference, kind of funny. Work on things like, walking carefully with things around the room. So her school, she started this year for the first time, and she had been at another daycare. And because of COVID restrictions, the very first day they had to just take her out of the car seat and take her in. So she had never been to the building before. She hadn't. She didn't know any of these people. And so she was freaking out. So I cried all the way home. It's hard to hear your kiddo cry, right? But by the next day, when I dropped her off, she fussed a little when they took her out of the car seat. And as soon as she was on the sidewalk, it was she was oh, okay, I know where I am. And she was good to go. So yeah, it's really hard to watch this happen. But again, if they're securely attached, they tend to be pretty adaptable to these different situations. So the types of insecure attachment include anxious ambivalent. And this is where the infant has a mixture of desire for contact with the mother, but then rejection of mom's affection. So insecurely anxious, ambivalent infants, mom would leave room, they would get upset, mom would come back in, and they would have a really hard time being consoled, calmed down by mom. Anxious avoidant is the infant just ignores mom. So mom leaves room, infant doesn't care. Mom comes back, infant doesn't care. So like no distressing, mom's gone, doesn't seem to be like super anxious about mom coming back. So that's anxious avoidant. And again, all these different insecurely attached are happening in a very small minority of kiddos. And then disorganized is the one that was added later. Ainsworth didn't come up with it, but sort of the people who continued researching this afterwards did. So disorganized is a lack of coherent attachment strategy. So there might be contradictory, disoriented behaviors. They might like approach the caregiver, but like with their back turned, kind of back up into them rather than running to them. So, again, just the behavior is not consistent. And so attachment styles are studied not only for how kids are doing, but also in terms of their implications for what happens when you grow up. So a lot of researchers who study attachment styles believe that these will influence your romantic relationships as you grow up. That essentially, if you don't have great attachment as a kid, you might have a hard time developing secure romantic attachment as an adult. So, what does foster attachment, right? That becomes the question. So infants are entirely reliant on their parents when they're born, right? So they need the parents to feed them, change them, all that good stuff. So they innately produce special behaviors that influence the behavior of their caregivers. So sucking is the need to obtain milk. So they'll still make the little like sucking sounds, like sometimes even when they're not hungry. It's just comforting to them. Originally, again, this is related to nursing or bottle feeding. But, maybe they might suck now on inanimate objects, like a lot of kids use pacifiers. And that is a soothing thing for them. And cuddling. All species of primates cuddle. So you saw the monkeys, they're cuddling, the great apes cuddle, and we as humans cuddle. This is, again, really similar to Harlow's findings, in particular front-to-front contact. So actually, when you give birth now, one of the things they try to do as soon as possible is put the baby skin to skin with you on your chest. And if for some reason mom can't do it, they'll could have dad do it, for example. So obviously, they had to wait a little bit because I had a C-section, all right? They couldn't put her on me right away. But then as soon as I was out of the OR, they brought her to me and I was able to do that. That is a very important form of contact. It is a way of bonding, and you get that great connection. Looking. So looking is a really big part of this. As I talked about, when they're very small, babies can look at their parents more, right? They recognize human faces more. Yeah, Lara, go ahead.
At what age do infants start talking or babbling?
Good question. Yeah, so they make sounds almost from birth, but they're mostly crying, right? And maybe little wheeze. And then it really depends on the kid. Probably they start making buzz around 4 months or so. And then making coherent words will really vary child to child. And then what those words are always ticks the parents off, right?
Because it's either mama or dada, right?
Apparently my first word was Lala, which is how I refer to our dog. So my parents were like, really? I don't actually remember what Quid's first word was. I should know that. But yeah, so it really does sort of depend on the kiddo developmentally. But yeah, they start making noises pretty early on. Again, I think it's evolutionarily adaptive for them to be super cute, right? Because then we want to take care of them. This is why a lot of baby animals are super cute. um, yeah, Carter, that's a really good question. Yeah, pushing kids isn't the best in general, sort of no matter what stage they're on. And certainly there are people who would disagree with that, especially like cross-culturally, right? But oftentimes that can just lead to frustration, right? And there are ways you can communicate with them. So we actually taught Quinn some baby sign language, and this is actually pretty common now. So I think when she was like 6 months old, she was able to do milk to ask for her bottle. And that was great because then when she was crying, right, you knew why. And then we tried to teach her diaper, which is like down by your hips, but you do this. And she would just go. Like we kind of learned like, okay, that's her trying to do diaper. But yeah, essentially you have to try not to push them too hard. Yeah, and Michaela's saying in the chat that, you know, like sometimes moms get upset because when you have a C-section, you don't get to hold the child right away. I just wanted her to be healthy, so I was glad they did what they needed to do. But it certainly can be sort of a really emotional time, especially if you planned your birth to kind of go one way and it doesn't go the way you want it, right? I sort of knew with all my risk factors, I might end up having a C-section. So when they told me like, okay, we're going to call it after I'd been pushing 3 hours, I was like, okay, what do you mean by that? They said, well, you're going to have a C-section. And I was like, okay, what's next? What do we do? And they're like, you're the most calm person we've ever seen for this. And I was like, it was pretty obvious. This is the direction we were going, right? But for some people, that becomes really difficult emotionally, right? So looking is a really important part of how infants communicate. It really shows their attention. And even young infants seek eye-to-eye contact. And if the parent doesn't respond, the baby shows distress. Down here in this corner are images from a study done by Tronick et al. And I'll put the name in the chat just in case anyone is curious. Not actually something I would make you bring up on an exam, but just I would ask about the study in general. So in normal situations, you know, moms smile at their babies when they see them, right? And the babies respond as soon as they can smile by smiling back and they'll stretch and things like that. And then so what the experimenters had mom do after they've done this is have mom just keep a straight face. Again, not harming baby at all, but not the way that mom would typically respond, right? So the infant would make the usual greetings, and you see that in A down here, right? Happy baby, but mom's trying to keep her face straight. And when mom doesn't respond, the baby looks confused, like, what's happening? Kind of eyeing it out, and you can see mom is like fighting a smile here. It's hard not to smile at your baby. And so then the baby turned away when mom didn't respond in that typical way. And then as soon as that part was over, and again, it wasn't very long, they would essentially say, okay, mom, you can interact with your baby. And the moms, in addition, like as you saw, this mom had a hard time not smiling. Some actually would break and smile. And those who didn't, when they picked their babies up or started to interact with them again, would say, oh, I'm so sorry. They would apologize, right? Even though at that point the baby probably doesn't understand, but it's just such a natural tendency to do that, and encourages that looking behavior that it felt very strange not to do that. Smiling on the baby's part is also reinforcing to parents. So at first, babies smile at pretty much any moving face, even if you put like a mask in front of them. But they adapt to smile more at those faces they recognize, right? And so that might start with just their immediate family, mom and dad, older siblings, right? But then that gets expanded to like grandparents or daycare caregivers, things along those lines. And then crying, the reason babies cry is that, you know, it's distressing. As Lara pointed out after we watched the video, it's really hard to hear a baby cry, right? So it's picking up the baby will stop the crying, so parents will do that, right? Basically, it's kind of like a negative reinforcement, right? Makes that bad sound we don't want to hear, stop. And then you immediately try to figure out why were they crying, right? And I thought people were crazy when they said this initially, but you do actually figure out like what the different cries mean. Like she would cry in a very different way when she was hungry than when she needed a change versus when she was just overtired and didn't want to go to sleep. My baby has had FOMO since she was like 5 weeks old. I'm just like, child, you're not gonna miss anything if you go to sleep.
I have a question. Can babies be stubborn?
A little bit, but it's not quite the same as when we're stubborn. So
How do you mean?
So they will repeat a behavior, right? And so we will interpret that as stubborn, but they're not trying to like intentionally be stubborn. They're just like, I know if I do this behavior, I typically get what I need, right? So yeah. And there are times where babies just, what you're trying just doesn't work. And I think that a lot of times the way we've tried to comfort them traditionally just doesn't work. So I actually did this training that was highly recommended to me by Dr. Winnicott, and it's called Happiest Baby. And then I found out like one of my other friends used it, and it sounds crazy. Like I remember when my parents first visited, we did it, and my parents were like, "This is some hocus pocus. What are you guys doing? Like, don't do this." Right? But you take them and you swaddle them, so you get their limbs real close to them, so they feel safe. You turn them on their side, and then you like bounce them up and down. Obviously, don't shake them. You never shake a baby. But it's like magic. It's like, and you also use like a white noise machine, or you can go like in their ear because that replicates the sound when they're in utero. So yeah, I think for many, many years, and especially first-time parents, there's no manual. They're just gonna send you home with this thing. My favorite description I've seen of it is like, after you give birth, it's essentially like you've been the victim of a car accident and they send you home with another victim of a car accident who you've never met before, right? So you essentially just sort of have to figure it out for yourself. So yeah, I think that that's a big part of it as well. Definitely not spoiling your baby. And I worried a lot because Quinn initially wouldn't nap anywhere but on me. And I was like, oh, am I ruining it? And like everyone I talked to was like, she's not going to do that for very long. Like enjoy it while you can. Right. And in fact, as we could see, the cuddling is developmentally important, and it fosters attachment. All right. So I have, there we go, a chart. So this is an older study, so it'd be interesting to redo this now and see if this has changed as men become more active in their kiddos' lives. Essentially, it shows that the sound of a crying baby is more likely to wake up women than men. Researchers have argued that the sounds for women are related to protecting the baby, but the sounds for men are related to protecting the whole family. So again, sort of one study. It'd be interesting to see again how this evolves as, again, men get more. I can tell you just anecdotally, which is certainly obviously not the same as research. It wasn't even in the top 10, but like my husband usually sleeps like a log, but he would wake up to Quinn crying. So it's certainly, men can learn to wake up pretty quickly to that. Alrighty, so one of the innate form of attachment that you don't have to foster really, that happens in some animals, particularly migratory birds that flock, is imprinting. So this is the powerful attraction of some species to the first moving object they see. Okay, so typically that is going to be the mother duck in this case, but sometimes it could be, a human caregiver. And so there was a psychologist, or maybe he was just an animal behaviorist, but his name is Konrad Lorenz, and he studied imprinting. And so he basically had the ducklings imprint on him So he made sure he was the first thing they saw when they came out of the egg. And I have actually a couple clips here that I think demonstrate this better than me talking about it. So I'll pull that up real quick. So I'll show you one of Loren's first, and then there's a more modern one. All trailing along behind him. And this is him swimming with them. Get on his back like they do with the mother duck. And then actually paddle in a boat so that they can have something they can follow at the appropriate time. Alrighty, so before we go back to the PowerPoint, I'll show you the other one here.
For the first 2 years of their life, these chicks will think of him as mother. They'll trust and follow him above all others. It's a process known as imprinting, and it's something that many birds do from the moment they're born. A few hours later, the hatchlings are already following their oversized mother goose wherever he goes. Christian's ultimate goal is to film these chicks retracing the great journeys of wild birds from his microlight. It's a huge commitment that will continue long after the filming is over. And it will take months of tender care and devotion before he and his new bird family take to the air.
Okay, so if anyone's ever seen the movie Fly Away Home, it's based on these ideas. It's about a family that raises geese and then has to like teach them how to migrate, basically. I don't know that the Wrens ever taught them how to migrate. He basically just like let them hang out and took care of them for the rest of their lives. As you saw at the end of the video for Wrens, he was interacting with adult ducks, and they were like, "Oh, we know you. You're cool." And they just think he's a weird giant duck, essentially. So this is adaptive for, again, like flocking birds, because, you know, they come out not knowing where I should go, what should I do, but if they can imprint on someone and just follow them, right, again, typically mom, then she will show them what to do. So it helps keep them safe. Alrighty, so the next thing we're going to start talking about is different models of stages of development. And so we're going to start with Erik Erikson's, yes, that's his real name, Erik Erikson, stages of psychosocial development. So he essentially looked at how do we develop, how do we interact, over the course of our entire lifespan. So he doesn't stop at, when childhood's done, he looked at the entire lifespan. And so for Erikson, each stage identifies a crisis. And the more successfully you resolve each crisis, the better adjusted you will be. So essentially, moving through these crises successfully one after the other will lead to psychological adjustment, will lead to a fulfilling life. And obviously, difficulty navigating any of these stages might lead to some issues, might lead to some psychopathology, for example, some abnormality. So the first one is trust versus mistrust. So this is that first year of life we've been talking about, right? So very young baby. And the main question here is, will the caregivers be reliable? If I cry, is the caregiver going to come and take care of my needs, right? Or is this going to be something where, my needs are not met? So trust versus mistrust, building that trust between the two of them. Then there's autonomy versus shame and doubt. So this is like 1 to 2 years of age. This is the child needs to learn to explore the world. So here it's bad if the parent is too smothering and doesn't let them kind of adventure out from them. But it's obviously bad if the parent's also completely neglectful and doesn't baby-proof the house or make sure they don't, get involved in something they shouldn't get into, like, laundry detergent or something. So a nice visual of this that I've heard before is, imagine the parents sitting in a chair and the baby's at their feet crawling around, or at 1 to 2 they might be walking right at some point in that year. It's sort of like how far from home base of the parent do they feel comfortable going, right? So the more autonomy they have, the better they feel about kind of venturing a little bit out but still staying safe. Again, if they're reprimanded too much, that's where they get that shame and doubt. Ooh, I shouldn't be doing these things. Doubt, can I do things on my own? Yeah, Lara, go ahead.
When is it that babies begin to crawl?
So really, again, this depends, but somewhere in the 7 to 8 month range typically. But it can be quite earlier depending. I think I told you all on Monday about I have a friend whose baby started walking at 9 months, and so she started crawling and pulling up way before babies typically do.
Is that also when parents go crazy with baby-proofing the house?
Yeah, because you have to, right? Because they can get into stuff you don't even think. I remember, so my child is quite tall for her age. She's 2, but she's the same height as the average 3-year-old. And so our doctor told us baby-proof for the WNBA. Basically, think that they can reach much higher than they can, because they can. Putting stuff on the counter doesn't keep it safe from her at all. So we have to make sure it's actually pushed back, or for example, our nail cutters and scissors and things in our bathroom, those are not only on the back of the counter, but we have this shelving system there with different drawers, and they're at the top drawer, right? So yeah, so you will pad things, you'll get, things that won't let them open doorknobs. You're basically just trying to keep them safe, right? And because no matter how much you keep an eye on them, they're quick once they start moving. And so you look down for 2 seconds because you're cleaning up behind them, and they're like, where are they? And they haven't gone too far, but they could potentially get into something if you're not careful. Yeah. Initiative versus guilt is essentially the preschool age, so 3 to 4 or 3 to 5. So can the child plan or do things on their own, like dress themselves? So does the parent let the kiddo pick out the clothes? If they do they judge them, right? Or they're just like, oh, that's great, that's fine, right? You want to wear a tutu with some camo pants? Awesome, right? If they make the kid feel guilty about making his or her own choices, like, oh no, you shouldn't wear that. Oh no, that doesn't match, right? Then the child won't function well. Erikson did have a really positive outlook on this stage. And he said that most guilt is quickly compensated for by a sense of accomplishment. My favorite story to tell about this is actually another friend of mine. When her son was in this phase, his thing was he likes to wear 2 different colored socks, right? And so she could have made a fuss about it and been like, no, you have to wear matching socks. But she just rolled with it and was like, now I don't have to match them after I wash them. I just throw them in the drawer, right? And so like she was just able to frame it as, hey, this could be a positive. And so obviously her child was allowed that initiative. But again, Erikson is pretty like, kids are pretty adaptable at this age. Even if they end up feeling guilt over something, they'll get an initiative, they'll get a sense of accomplishment from another task. Because kids are figuring out a lot of different things at this point, right? Then, sort of elementary school age to 6 years to puberty, Erikson said, we have competence versus inferiority. Sometimes you'll see this represented when people talk about his work as industry versus inferiority. I've seen both used interchangeably. So this is where kids start to compare their self-worth with other kids, such as in their classroom as they attend elementary school. And they can recognize disparities in personal abilities relative to other kids, right? So they might figure out like, ooh, like, you know, Jacob is really good at reading, but I'm really good at math. Or, you know, I don't know, Susie is the generic name I use. Susie is really good at soccer, you know, but maybe I'm better at hopscotch, right? So they start to sort of figure out and compare things, and like, even if no one around them is doing this, they like to do it, right? They like to, and this is a natural process psychologically for humans. We call it social comparison. And typically it's actually good. We can learn from it, especially when we're watching people who are like doing things we aspire to do. Then you have identity versus role confusion, which is teen years into the 20s. So the reason this one's highlighted is often typically people who are taking this class are in this phase. So certainly something that might sound familiar to you as I start to read the description. So here the idea is the questioning of yourself. Who am I? How do I fit into things? Right? Who am I going to be? Where am I going to go to college? You know, once I get there, what am I going to major in? What do I want to be when I grow up? Right? You know, which clique do I want to hang out with? Right? What do I want to prioritize in my life? So this is a time of great introspection, trying to figure things out, basically. What should I wear to prom? Yeah, exactly. It can be stuff as small as that. Or should I go to prom? Right? So I think of all those angsty teen movies where they're like, I like going to prom, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, this is, and the interesting thing about this is that it partially keeps getting extended because we've sort of drawn out adolescence as humans, right? Back in, say, like the Middle Ages, people would get married maybe when they were 15, right? And start having families of their own. Now we clearly don't really endorse that. And especially with the economy, you know, we have more and more people who, you know, even might have their degrees, but having to stay home with their parents. And so it just sort of draws out this stage. Intimacy versus isolation overlaps here. So it is possible to kind of be dealing with both of these crises, the identity and the intimacy at once. And so this is like 20s to your early 40s. And this is more about your relationships with other people. So it can be romantic. It can be, do I want to date anybody? Do I want to get married? But it can also just be like, who are my friends going to be? Who do I want to surround myself with? This might be a time where you seek out more friendships. It might also be a time when you realize some friendships in your life, right? Even ones that might have been great, you know, when you were in high school or even college, are just toxic, right? And they're not beneficial to you. And they might even not be beneficial to the other person, right? And so you might need to choose to do that, right? And then also as you get into maybe more challenging careers that demand a lot of your time, right? You start to have to make decisions of, am I going to, just throw myself wholeheartedly into this and not care if I get time to hang out with my friends, or am I going to really try to strike a balance? This is also when people might start trying to figure out, like, do I want part of that intimacy to be family intimacy? Do I want to have kids, right? Or do I want to stay single, or maybe do just with my partner? And again, all of these are valid life choices. But this is the stage of life where you're going to figure that out. And more couples are choosing to have kids later. So once you're past the age of 35, you technically have a geriatric pregnancy. I had one. They call it advanced maternal age. I put everything in air quotes because even my OBs have been like, that is the convention, but it's silly. But it does mean they like check a few more things out in terms of health risks for the mother and the fetus. But they used to think that like 35 is essentially when like you start to lose some reproductive abilities, but now they're saying it's more like 40. So people are still making these decisions throughout this time, and particularly women who have invested in careers, or families in general that have invested in careers might not choose to have kids until they're established in their 30s or even their late 30s or early 40s. A lot of the professors who are sort of around my age, right, have been having kids lately because this feels like the right time in our careers to do that. Then you get to what's called generativity versus stagnation. And this is your 40s to your 60s. And this is essentially like, do I like the job I'm in? Do I feel like I'm being productive in it? Do I feel like I'm contributing? Or do I just feel like I'm stagnant? Like I'm just going in and punching the clock every day? And so this might be what would be called the midlife crisis. There is some debate within the psychological world as to whether the midlife crisis is actually a thing. Certainly some people go through it, but definitely not all. And so it's essentially when you start to measure your accomplishments and your failures thus far in your life. Do I feel good about what I've accomplished in my career? Am I satisfied with my life so far or not? Stagnation is the feeling of not having done anything, or in particular, Erikson said, the feeling of not having done anything to help the next generation. Erikson really was a believer in that being a key component of how you felt at this stage. So this is where you might see some people, change jobs to something they find, more fulfilling. This is where you might see people take up hobbies, right, to try and find that different part of life. And for some people, it turns into buying a sports car, right? But for the vast majority of people, they navigate this pretty well. They're fairly happy with their career, or they can find the ways to feel like they're productive. Again, if it's not in their career, maybe by volunteering in their community, or, if you had, kids in your 20s or 30s, those kids are trying to get to like high school age, and you can feel good about supporting them as they figure things out. And then integrity versus despair is sort of what we think of as retirement age, so like 65 and up. Although certainly, again, none of these ages are like actual cut points, right? They're just sort of vaguely, this is when this happens. So this is where you kind of look back over your whole life and you say, what have I done? And some handle it gracefully, and they feel pretty good about it. They find ways to be really active. Some can be, unfortunately, really bitter and unhappy and dissatisfied with what they've accomplished or what they failed to accomplish within their time. They start to reflect on the past, and they might conclude with satisfaction of what they've done or with despair. And sometimes people feel the need to essentially like continue the generativity or invest their integrity in things that, might not be a career, but make them feel good, right? So for example, my paternal grandfather just turned 90 and he's still doing great. And when he retired, was not the type of guy who was just going to sit around at home. So he got really involved in our church. He volunteered quite a bit. He started volunteering with the disaster services in our area, so they would bring like coffee and snacks to the firefighters when there was a fire, for example, and actually eventually ended up sort of running that for the part of the country that I grew up in. And then, if that wasn't enough, he decided, I think when he was like 70 something, to become a ordained chaplain for the fire department. So he was able to get involved that way as well, which was really, really cool. So, you know, some people find really different ways to get involved. And some people, it's other things like travel. So before Dr. Clayton was here in social work, there was Professor Payne. And when she retired, she immediately started traveling everywhere. Like she was one of the first Americans to go to Cuba when it opened up, right? Like that was just her thing, what she wanted to do. And that, you know, made her very fulfilled. So there are different ways to navigate this part of your life in ways that make you really happy. All right, and this is just a graphic representation of those stages. I don't actually know that this is like that helpful, to be honest. But, you know, some people prefer to look at things in different ways, so that's why I do include it. Alrighty, so we are going to focus in a little bit more here on that identity versus role confusion stage. Again, partially because this is where most of you are at right now, right? And also because Erikson did do quite a bit of work expanding on this stage. So he said that the identity crisis here is a normal part of development and that it can lead to a growth experience. So the person can essentially come out a better person on the other side of this. And so James Marcia, based on Erikson's research, proposed a classification scheme of 4 identity statuses that you might achieve based on going through this identity versus role development stage, and based on what he called crisis and commitment. So crisis is the period during which you're choosing among all these different alternatives. And then commitment is your personal investment in an identity. So, you know, I have decided this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to deviate from it. And crisis is when you're like trying to figure that out. And so here are his 4 identity statuses that come out of this idea. And so the first is identity diffusion. So this is someone who hasn't experienced their identity crisis yet, and they haven't made any commitment, right? So they're just sort of maybe at the start of this stage. They haven't felt that pressure to make these decisions yet. Maybe they're like, 12, 13. So they're just kind of living life. And there's nothing wrong with that, unless you kind of get stuck there, right? And you never decide. That's a problem. Identity foreclosure is where you've made a commitment, but you've never experienced an identity crisis. So what happens here with a lot of, I guess at this point, still kind of kids, teens, will say, adolescents, is their parents will say, this is what you're going to do, right? And then they don't question that. Okay, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to go to school and major in business, right? And they never like stop to think about, is that what I want to do? Am I interested in that? Will that benefit society in the way I want to benefit society, right?
That sounds toxic.
Yeah, it can be. It certainly can be. Yeah, especially if you never go through that crisis. So these might be people who like have more of a midlife crisis later, for example. And my parents have the best of intentions here, right? They're not trying to harm their children. They're just like, we want you to do well. We want to support you doing well. Here's how we think you can end up doing well. But it means that the adolescent doesn't get the chance to like figure that out for themselves. Identity moratorium is where you're in the midst of the identity crisis and you haven't made any commitment yet. Again, this is not problematic unless you just get sort of stuck here, right? If you never decide. These are the people who end up changing their major 6 times and they're staying extra years because of it. Or like the people who go and get like a can't imagine, but like people who go and get 2 and 3 different PhDs, like it takes 6 years to get a PhD in clinical psychology after undergrad. Like I can't imagine being like, you know what, I'm gonna go do that again. But for people who might be stuck here, that might happen, right? And so this can be toxic in a different way, where you're just sort of always sort of floating, never settling. And so Marcia said what you're really aiming for is identity achievement at the end of this crisis, right? You're not going to get there right away. You've got to navigate the crisis first. But identity achievement is where you've undergone the identity crisis and you've made a commitment. So you went through all this sort of, what should I do? Who should I be? Right? And based on that, you think, this is what I want to do, right? And this might come, you know, much later in that cycle. The example I used here is me, actually. So I was convinced I was going to be a veterinarian. I did a job shadow with a vet when I was in college. It was holiday break between fall and spring semesters of my sophomore year. And it was starting to already sort of feel like, maybe this is not quite what I imagined. Like there was a lot more paperwork. You spend a lot less time with the animals than I imagined. And then the doctor, the vet I was shadowing, did a behavioral analysis, a behavioral consultation on a Cocker Spaniel. And this dog had been clawing up its owner's carpet when they left the house. And they just paid, I think, like $4 or $5 grand to have the whole house recarpeted. And the dog did it again. And so they brought it in because they were like, we don't want to get rid of this dog, but we can't afford to keep replacing our carpet. And what the vet was able to do was give them like behavioral tips to do. She diagnosed the dog with separation anxiety because it only did it when they left the house. And then she prescribed Prozac for the dog. I was like, I didn't even know you could do that. And when we left the room, I said, like, that is so fascinating. And she said, yeah, you don't get any of that in vet school. You have to make it up as you go. And like, it was that moment, right? I was like, total crisis in that moment, realizing like what I wanted to do all along was not actually what I wanted to do. Sort of realizing, you know, I'm much more interested in the psychology part of this than I am, you know, the medical part of it. And so I went back to campus in the spring semester and I changed my entire course schedule. I declared a psychology major. Actually picked up a WGS minor, Women's and Gender Studies minor at that point. And then I had commitment and then I felt good. But that month or so where I was in like deep crisis, man, that was, it was that, right? And so for some people that's much longer, right? And so it's definitely something that is tough to go through, but important to navigate because again, if you get kind of stuck at one of these three, it might get in the way, right? And this is a nice chart that kind of shows how that works, right? So if you've made a commitment, this is what I'm going to do, but before you did that, you explored the meaningful alternatives, right? Then that's identity achievement. If you've made a commitment, but you never explored anything, again, maybe you just, if it was me and I was like, I'm just going to be a veterinarian and I never explored it and I never bothered doing the job shadow, right? That can be identity moratorium and that could be not great. If you've made a commitment, yes, that's right. Yeah, sorry, identity moratorium is where you are exploring, but you haven't made the commitment. I was describing identity foreclosure. So identity foreclosure is where you've made the commitment, but you haven't done the exploration. Identity moratorium is you're in the exploration, but you're never making a commitment, right? And again, it's okay to be a temporary thing, but not if you get stuck here, right? And then identity diffusion, again, if this is at the start of this phase, fine, right? But it's just if you get stuck here, it's a problem where you haven't made a commitment yet and you haven't actually explored anything yet. You know, again, if you're a young adolescent, fine. If you're 25 and you're in identity diffusion, might be more problematic, right? Especially in terms of like finding a fulfilling career for yourself. Alrighty, so I am going to stop there for today because the next thing we go into is Piaget's stages, and I think it's a lot more helpful to do those all in one lecture because they sort of are very cohesive if you do that. So I am going to stop sharing And again, as per usual, you can use this time to work on your Connect assignments or do whatever else you all need to do. And I will stick around a couple minutes in case anyone has questions. If not, have a good weekend, and I will see you on Monday.
I
yeah.
have a quick question. Oh, sorry, you go first.
All right, I have a quick question. Okay, so is explaining to the media quiz 8, did we already do that?
So we did 8. We haven't done 9 yet.
Okay, so 8 is still up there, so I was a little confused. All right, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, now I think I might have missed an assignment, but I can't remember what it was. Can you remind me? I know I didn't miss the Connect assignments, but what was that last other assignment you went thing? Something that we had to do before leaving.
Are you thinking about the psychology experience credits, maybe?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Yep, they are outlined on the syllabus. So take a look. There's a whole section on how to do them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.